When you think about your birth, what do you think about? Often people are really excited, but often there's a lot of fear and anxiety around how painful is it going to be? How am I going to handle it? How's my partner going to handle it?
In terms of the non-pharmaceutical things, what can you share on pain relief and how that actually works?
Yeah. So I think what you mentioned before,
Welcome back to Wildly Empowered Women. I am very excited for today's episode. I've got beautiful Kate Walton with us today.
How do you feel about birth right now? Let's just take a snapshot of where we're starting off with.
An incredible Hypnobirthing Australia childbirth educator.
It was mind-blowing. It really was.
Welcome back to Wildly Empowered Women. I am very excited for today's episode because it is extremely relevant and timely for me, sitting here on a yoga ball, 38 weeks pregnant, and I've got beautiful Kate Walton with us today, who is an incredible Hypnobirthing Australia childbirth educator who I did some group classes with a couple of months ago, and it has just made me feel so excited and genuinely empowered for this next birth. And for those of you who already know me, this is my third birth. So you would think that I would be a little bit seasoned and kind of know what I'm in for. And I do. And still, I have felt so much more empowered this pregnancy and this sort of lead up to birth from working with Kate. So I'm really excited to have her on today. She's also a hypnotherapist, a transformational life coach, and she's based here in the Northern Beaches in Sydney. She passionately specializes in mind and body techniques for fertility, pregnancy, birth, and beyond. And Kate and I had some really, really empowering discussions during the course that I did with her, her group classes, and just offline as well. And I was just like, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast, and I wanted to do it now. In the lead up to birth as well, because just there's been so much that I've learned, interestingly, on this path that I didn't know my first two pregnancies or, first two birth experiences. So thank you so much for being on the podcast, Kate. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This is very, very exciting. And yes, definitely when you're in my class, when I was talking, I'd look over to you occasionally and there'd be all this like, yes, and I could tell that you were just vibing with everything that was going on, and I loved it.
I was so much. Like, I'm such an expressional person too. Like, you would have known about it if I wasn't vibing. I think I was almost getting whiplash from nodding so much. Like,
oh, you were.
Just so good.
Great.
So is there anything else about your background that you can share with us and how you got into this line of work to begin with?
Yeah, so I'd probably have to go all the way back to before I had kids. And so when me and my husband decided that we wanted to start a family, thinking we were young and healthy, thinking it would happen really easily, because I think growing up, most of us are led to believe that if you have unprotected sex, you fall pregnant. And then when we went to have kids, it didn't happen quickly and created a bit of stress. And so what happened is we had a very long 4.5-year journey to have our first child. We had lots of recurrent miscarriages and infertility, unexplained infertility. And so really I came in through that route because everything that I learned about the mind and body connection and my mindset and how that was kind of playing into my fertility journey, back then I knew that I had to help other women start their families. I just didn't know what that looked like back then. That was 13 years ago now. And so then I, went about working and having another daughter. And I found that I was spending a lot of time at work, had no work-life balance. And eventually I said to my husband, this is ridiculous. We tried so hard to have our beautiful daughters and I'm working way too much. I need to go back and study, follow my passion and start helping women. And so I realized what that kind of looked like, and I knew it was going to be kind of that emotional support and well-being, guidance, some education, hypnotherapy is something that I fell into and I absolutely loved, and the life coaching. So that's kind of how it started. And it was really around supporting those women through infertility, pregnancy. And then I had women falling pregnant. And so it was just a logical transition to then follow their journey through to the birth education. And so I became a Hypnobirthing Australia childbirth educator and started teaching. And I have just fallen in love with everything birth. And it's probably what I focus more on now. Yeah, so that I kind of came in that way. So it was after I had my children that I became an educator.
That's awesome. And can we just explain for people what hypnobirthing is before we get too deep into the questions?
Absolutely. So I think there's a bit of misconception when it comes to what hypnobirthing is all about. If you told me 13 years ago that I would be a hypnobirthing educator, I would have laughed at you. When I was first pregnant with my daughter Mia, I did have a friend who said, "Oh, you need to do this hypnobirthing course. It's going to be great." And I thought, "Oh, that sounds really woo-woo." And I didn't do it. Isn't that funny? So I did a completely different course way back when. And then through this process and then becoming a hypnotherapist and just loving all things hypnotherapy, it was just a logical choice to do hypnobirth and that education. So in a nutshell, hypnobirthing education is everything that you would expect from a childbirth education course. So you are learning the ins and outs of all things birth and, you know, the process and you know, what's available to you, navigating the hospital system, but so much more. So there's a lot of education around mindset, because that is a huge piece in birth. So, you know, it's not just so much about the strength of the body, it's mainly the strength of the mind. And, you know, I know you know that better than anyone. So, so a lot of work around mindset and empowering people to understand what their choices are in birth, because if you don't know your choices, then you don't have any. So, and also that birth partner support. So helping the birth partners, whether that be dad or friend, mum, whatever, helping them to understand what their role is in the room and helping their birthing woman, birthing mama, to have a really empowered experience. So helping them to feel safe and comfortable. Being that buffer between medical caregivers and the mum is really important, and how to provide, you know, physical support as well, like massage, acupressure and things like that. Yeah, so it's, you know, it comes from a lot of background. There's so many beautiful, influential childbirth educators and researchers throughout the world over a long period of time, and a lot of their education comes into this course. And yeah, beautifully bundled for the modern family.
Yeah, and maybe we can talk a bit about that too, around the history and a bit of context around childbirth, because that was something that I loved so much that you explained in the class, was how it's actually changed so much over the centuries, and where our power and trust as women has potentially been a little bit lost, because obviously our bodies are designed for this. And, you know, like we're literally designed for creating and birthing and raising and feeding children. A woman's body is designed so specifically for that. Yet there's so much that we seem to have lost or see, like power and choices that seem to have been taken away or maybe forgotten along the way. So the way that you explained childbirth and midwives in particular as what they used to be and how they used to work compared to now was really interesting. So yeah, can we talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when I was becoming a hypnobirthing childbirth educator, one of my assignments, if you like, was to write an article. And I thought what would be great is writing an article about the history of birth in relation to fear. And when I started researching it, it was mind-blowing. It really was. It was totally blew my mind. And so I read that to all of my clients when they come in and do a class with me. So basically, the word midwife translates to with woman. It just means with woman. And so back in the day, midwives were commoners that had their education and training informally passed down from one midwife to another. And so they're in the community, they were praised, they were entrusted, they were a really important part of the community in helping to bring new life into the world safely. And so they understood the power and the wisdom of a birthing woman's body. They understood optimal positions to promote labour and birth. They understood how to nourish a woman throughout their labour experience and also postpartum and to support breast milk supply, and how to catch and care for newborn babies. And so they're a very important part of the community. Then what happened? Then things started to go a bit pear-shaped. In 1484, Pope Innocent VIII spoke out about witchcraft and his belief that female healers, or, what we would consider, women who were helping other women in the community with health and, babies and cyclical health, things like that. So he believed that these female healers were disguised as witches. And as a result, over 60,000 women plus were burnt alive at the stake. And so around that time, if you weren't dobbing in another woman, you were seen as hiding something or being a witch yourself. So this is where we see women pitting against each other in competition. So it's a horrible, really horrible part of our past. And so then as a result, there's not a lot of support for women who are birthing. And if you had a complication in your pregnancy, you weren't seen as fit for care under a physician. So you were given a local shepherd, or you were left to die. So that's horrible. And then as a result, women started to feel that fear around falling pregnant. One, because if you've got complications, then, the likelihood of having a safe birth wasn't that great. And there just wasn't a lot of medical care. So then we start seeing this fear around childbirth. And then we have King Louis XIV, who then insisted on seeing his wives, his wife or mistresses. He wanted to see the birth take place, and he wanted to see the baby crowning and come through the birth canal. And it wasn't usual for a father to be in the room with the birthing mum. It was women's secret business. You had your mums, your sisters, your besties, and midwives there, but there was generally no men. So he was kind of the first one to want to be in the room. And for ease of viewing, he wanted his wife or mistress to lie down on the bed so he could see the baby being born. That, of course, created problems for mum because the pelvis wasn't able to open properly and created pain. But because this is King Louis, it was then seen as being more regal or ladylike to give birth whilst lying down. Right? So we can see that's where we start to see the start of women lying down in birth. And so after that, because women are lying down to birth, it's become more uncomfortable. We had Queen Elizabeth, she was Queen Victoria, sorry. She insisted on being given chloroform. She wanted to just knock herself out because, she had lots of children. And then that's where we start to see drugs being used in birth. From there, we kind of continue this, the spiral downwards. Women are knocking themselves out cold with chloroform. They're lying down on a bed, and these babies need help coming out safely. And so we have the start of early obstetrics. And so male doctors saw that obstetrics was the ideal money-making opportunity. And they started spreading rumours that midwives were dirty because they were commoners and seemingly uneducated, although we know that that wasn't really the case. And so birth moved from homes to hospitals. Sadly, there was not a lot of understanding around bacteria. And so we saw the start of childbirth fever because we had doctors that were performing autopsies on a dead body and then in the next moment turning around and performing episiotomies, etc., to help these babies being born. And there was no washing of hands or equipment, etc. And so these women, it was really normal for a woman who required intervention in their birth to die of childbirth fever. So, of course, women became not only terrified to have a baby, but terrified to fall pregnant. So sad. So thankfully, later on, we have Dr. Louis Pasteur who discovered germs under a microscope, and we started to see proper hygiene practices being used and maternal well-being rose again. But, all of this still lives within us. These are the stories about mothers, and it's been passed down from generation to generation until now. We still hold that fear from the past. And although it's not relevant today because we have access to incredible medical care if we need it, but, there's still some birthing in a hospital. We do feel, a lot of people feel like it's safer. That's a really normal, natural thing to feel safer in a hospital for anything. But it can also work against us, against our nervous system. Yeah.
That is so fascinating to hear all of that. And it makes so much sense. And I'm interested to hear, do you feel like the original midwife that had all of that wisdom and knowledge and obviously had been passed down generation to generation as well, like a lot of just embodied wisdom around birth, do you feel like that's the modern day sort of doula, or what's the equivalent to that now?
I think for me, it's probably the private midwife that works mainly in home birth. Certainly doula as well. Yeah. A lot of the private midwives are absolutely incredible because they are seeing those home births that are undisturbed, that are, those physiological, beautiful, natural births that don't have all those unnecessary tests and interventions that you would see in hospital birth. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's almost like coming full circle now, like back in the day when we trusted our bodies and the midwives knew what we were capable of and what positions to be in and what different things to do for a bit of pain management, stuff like that. Like we've almost come full circle now of starting to trust ourselves again, and certainly like hypnobirthing teaches a lot of that. So what do you find is the feedback from women who, when the penny kind of starts to drop, when they're learning hypnobirthing, for example, and they're like, oh, I actually could do this without pain relief if I want, or, my body is actually designed to this, and they start to learn maybe a little bit more about the biological side of things as well, what's actually happening in the body. Like, what's the reaction?
Oh, I love watching the penny drop. I love it. Usually when people come to the class to begin with, depending on how many people I've got in the class and how much time we've got, if we're starting on time, I do try and have that conversation to begin with and ask people, how do you feel about birth right now? Let's just take a snapshot of where we're starting off with. When you think about your birth, what do you think about? And, often people are really excited, but often there's a lot of fear and, anxiety around, how painful is it going to be? How am I going to handle it? How's my partner going to handle it? And then, the first module that we go through is creating and maintaining a positive mindset. And that story is one of the stories that I tell. Just slowly throughout that first module, in the first couple of hours, people start to click and you see the nods and it's like, oh, hang on a second. And when you understand how fear plays out in birth and creates tension and really works against you, then absolutely, people start to get really, really excited until we get to the end of the course and it's like, right, how are we all feeling now? And everyone is excited. They feel empowered. They know what they know what they have to do and they know what they can do. And the birth partners, that's, it's really exciting to see a birth partner realize that they don't have to be a fly on the wall, standing back, kind of going, I don't know what the hell I can do. They, are so empowered to understand that they've got a really important role and that role is just so foundational. It really is. It's so important. So yeah, I just love watching the journey unfold for them. And then obviously speaking to them afterwards and getting their birth stories and finding out how it all went. It's just, I think it's the best part of my job is getting the text message in the morning and seeing these beautiful baby photos and hearing their stories. It's the best job in the world. Yeah.
So beautiful. And so obviously I'm a third-time mum and I've already got 2 birth experiences, and I actually used Hypnobirth affirmations for both of them and went drug-free, had natural births with both of them. One of them absolutely unintentionally, like I wanted drugs, but I couldn't have them. It was just like went too quickly. And the other one, I was kind of like, well, I've done this before, like it's fine. But doing the course and actually learning about the affirmations and the hypnobirthing stuff that I'd been using without having done the course was so eye-opening and good to get the context for. And also just really empowering to hear about, like you mentioned, the options and the choices that I didn't even know I had available to me. And I've had 2 kids. Like, it's pretty mind-blowing that I had no idea. So I'm curious to hear if you get many seasoned mums, especially ones that have feedback similar to me, or is it mostly first-time mums that join your classes?
So I do definitely get a mix. Probably, I would say it's probably 60% first-time mamas and 40% second or third-time mums. Yeah. And I love getting my second and third time mums and seeing that difference from that first or second birth experience to now. And so I've had a few mamas like you who have had 1 or 2 really fast births, and then they come to me for that second or third birth and they just want some tools to be able to better handle that fast labour. And it is fantastic seeing the results, and they definitely feel more in control of their birthing experience. And it might still be wild and fast, but they actually remember it. That's another thing. I'm not sure if you had that experience where you just kind of don't really remember the birth experience because it was so wild and fast. Yeah. Is that something that you experienced?
Yeah. There's a lot of things that Vic sort of mentions to me and I'm like, I have no idea. Like the other day, we were talking about how long I was pushing for and he was like, it was 20 minutes. I remember, like I looked at my watch, it was 20 minutes and I was like, wow, in hindsight, like it probably would have been 20 minutes, but it felt like 5 minutes, even though it was very painful. It felt like 5 minutes. And I'm kind of lucky that I had him there, so present and so like he's very involved when we have a child. He's very I'm very lucky there. But yeah, I there's definitely things that I don't remember for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's really common. So yeah, just being able to have some tools and techniques, the breathing techniques and the affirmations, mental rehearsal, visualization. There's so many wonderful natural drug-free options that are available to you that relieve pain. So visualization, mental rehearsal relieves pain because it takes a lot of neurons to create visualization in your mind, and those neurons would otherwise be used to perceive pain. Something so simple, which can be a pain relieving exercise as well. Obviously, the breathing techniques and the mental, the mindset practice is obviously important too, and having the physical support from a partner, providing acupressure, light touch massage, things like that. There's some really great techniques that you can use for second and third time mums that create a really big difference. And then for first time couples, so empowering. So they leave feeling really educated and empowered, understanding how they can navigate the hospital system, actually understanding what they might come up against. If it's a second time pregnancy, maybe the first time you did a hospital course, or maybe there wasn't any education the first time for your birth, and you assume that you'll have support and be told everything that you need to do. And obviously the hospitals do a great job of that too, but there's certainly things that can kind of smack you in the face that you don't expect. Yeah,
and I actually did your course because I was looking for a local hypnobirthing teacher, and I wanted to do a course and be there in person and learn from someone for pain relief techniques because of my last two experiences where I couldn't have any, pharmaceutical pain relief. But I felt like I didn't really know every tool that I could have had in my belt for those two experiences, which is what I came to your class for. But interestingly, and I got that from being there, but interestingly, one of the most valuable things that I actually walked away from was being so empowered and informed on my choices. And interestingly, doing quite a lot differently this time to what I've done before, purely because I know that I can, and I didn't realize the option was there before.
Yeah.
It's so awesome. So let's maybe talk through some of them because they're ones that I'm actually really passionate about. And I know that they'll make a big difference because already I feel more empowered just having made the decision to do things differently. So one of them is and I guess this is after the child, like after the actual birth, but it's a big one, is saying no to the Syntocin for the placenta to come out. And actually I've decided to sort of take, I guess, things one step further and also have a lotus birth, which is for any listeners listening going, what the hell is that? It is where you birth the placenta, and it is, you have the baby and then you birth the placenta and it's still attached, and you don't rush to cut the cord. Eventually you cut the cord, or you can actually leave it on if you want, but that seems like a lot of admin to me, carrying around a baby and a placenta for a few days, but you can do that. But I've decided to do a lotus birth because I really wanted to have the cord from the placenta to the baby completely clear before cutting it. And I didn't want to be rushed because I've had complications in the past that have arisen. Now in hindsight, I can see that they actually happened because there was a bit of a rush or like pressure for me to, give birth to the placenta, and I was given Syntocin, which if you've had a baby, you might remember a little jab in your thigh where they give you Syntocin to sort of get the placenta out a little bit quicker. So that was a really big thing that I didn't even realize I had a choice with. And I didn't know all the possible scenarios and choices, to do with actually giving birth to the placenta, which is a big thing. You're literally giving birth to an organ that you created for the baby that the baby's still attached to. Like, I think that sometimes it's like possibly looked over a little bit, where it's really important. Like, it's such an important part of birth. So thanks to you, I'm well aware of my like the different choices and the different options there. But I'm interested to hear your perspective on that and any builds on that, and also if that's what, you know, the feedback that you get from people as well when it comes to the placenta.
Yeah. So
Before we go on, I want to ask you a super powerful question. What would it mean to you to make decisions based on your soul rather than your bank balance? Freedom to me means having true autonomy and choice in your life to live based off your values and soul's desires, rather than what you can purely afford for you and your family or what your job requires of you. This is why I've been empowering women for the past almost 5 years to earn more with pleasure, earning your true worth without the insane hustle and with actually having choice in your life. It is so much more about how you earn rather than what you earn. If you'd like to learn more about how I mentor women to earn a time-leveraged income online, selling conscious, health-based products and learning the skills of personal branding and attraction marketing, both very sexy skills to have, then click on the link in the show notes or DM me the word info on Instagram so we can have a proper chat. I love having one-on-one convos with you savvy queens and showing you how this kind of income and our community can help you truly live wildly empowered. Big love, back to the episode.
So first and foremost, if we go back to, after we deliver the baby, then the baby's still attached to the cord. And so commonly, if you think about it from a hospital or an obstetrician's perspective or a midwife perspective, you've got other people in the hospital and they've got, you know, lots of other things that they've got a process, right? They've got their checklist of things that they want to do or need to do. And so baby's born, and then time-wise, logically, the next box that they need to tick is clamping the cord, cutting the cord, birthing the placenta, weighing baby, all of those things. But what we want to remember is that once our baby is born, they're still attached to the placenta inside. The placenta is feeding the baby with oxygenated blood. So whilst the baby is adjusting to breathing on its own, we want to ensure that the cord is still attached because it's still feeding baby. So baby will actually get a third of their blood through the placenta in the moments and in the minutes after birth. So obviously that is really important. They are going to be of a bigger weight. They're going to get all of the incredible oxygen and nutrients from the placenta. Okay, so it's a really important process. Once the baby is born and the blood is moving through, we want to, obviously situational, there can be situations where we can't wait an excessive amount of time. But if baby's well, if mum's well, if there's no complications going on, we want to wait for white. Okay, so that's the kind of term that we use. We wait for white. So we wait for the cord to go white until it becomes white and stringy, until we can see that there's no more blood flowing through it. So what you're doing is you are going to be waiting for the placenta to be delivered. And so if the birth again has been problem-free, if it's a nice, calm birthing environment, there is usually no issues and no problems delivering the placenta naturally without the use of syntocinon. What we see is that the injection in the leg with a syntocinon is the most common intervention that is done without consent. And so consent can often be assumed because it's so stock standard and commonplace, if that makes sense. So do you remember having a conversation about the injection in your leg?
I remember having it both times, and I remember the language being around, oh, we're just going to give you this Syntocin to help the placenta come out quicker.
Mm.
Like it was never a question. It was just like, oh, we're going to do this thing. So it was sort of, I just felt like it was assumed that like, oh, it's just a thing that we do. I didn't really question it because I didn't really feel like I had the option to question it either times, because it wasn't phrased as a question. So yeah, you're definitely right.
Yeah. And so that's what we hear most often. And so if there's no problems, if it's been a really calm birth, then it is more, you're more likely to have a really calm placenta birth. And so what happens is after baby's born, you're giving bubs big skin to skin and lots of cuddles and kisses. The reward pathways, the dopamine reward pathways when you're smelling baby's head triggers the birth of the placenta to disconnect from the lining of the uterus. That also helps when you're breastfeeding as well. And the oxytocin initiates your surges once more. And so that can take, obviously every single birthing situation is different, but it can take, anywhere from 15 minutes up to an hour. Generally speaking, most medical care providers won't give you more than kind of 45 minutes to an hour. If it's anything after that, then they'll want to intervene and give you that Syntocin injection in your leg. But you can absolutely speak to your caregivers and put it in your birth preferences that you would prefer to have a natural placenta delivery. If you are waiting for that placenta to do its job, then you're less likely to have hemorrhages after birth as well. Okay. And so if you think about it, if you were to clamp the cord prior to it finishing its job and feeding the placenta, and then you give birth to the placenta, but it's got all this excess blood, then of course it makes sense that you would be more likely to have a hemorrhage after birth. Yeah? Makes sense. So then, so you can then, so technically a lotus birth is where you do keep the baby, the cord, the placenta attached until it just naturally drops off the belly button. And so, you would keep that in a bag, in a Hessian bag. You would cover it in salt and herbs and flowers to make sure that it doesn't smell. And you take that home with you. I think that the nice thing about that is it kind of keeps you stationary. You can't move around. You're less likely to go to the shops with a placenta. If you know what I mean. So and there's different beliefs from different cultures around the world, and they talk about the placenta being like a sibling to the baby. It's been a thing that's nourished your baby for 9 months. And there's other beliefs that, you shouldn't disconnect it, or maybe you should disconnect it because it can have bad juju and all of these things. There's some really interesting beliefs. So, yeah.
It's been really interesting to learn about, because I'm also, for the first time, getting my placenta dried and encapsulated, like in the little caps. And I was reading, like on the ladies' website that I'm doing it through, about how we are the only mammal that don't eat our placenta. And it's just like a done thing. Like animals just eat their placenta for, all sorts of reasons. But and the reason that I'm doing it is because it is seen to be great for breast milk supply, and also postpartum, depression if you get the blues after a baby. And I've not had that my first two, but if ever I was going to get it, it would be with a third, with 2 kids, with a lot on my plate. And also my mum's not well at the moment. So, it's kind of that time in my life where I'm like, I'll take any support I can get, from encapsulating the placenta to also I'm having a doula for the first time. And I've sort of spoken to her about how, she's going to be at the birth, which will be amazing, but I mostly wanted her for the postpartum period to be sort of part of my support team. So, any thoughts on placenta encapsulation as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to be doing my placenta encapsulation training this year. I have actually encapsulated a few placentas for family members. But and my history prior to doing all of this was actually in the food industry, in the meat industry, and I was doing a lot of food technology. So turns out that background has actually come in handy too, which is nice. But yeah, absolutely. Consuming your placenta, I think it feels a lot less freaky if we're drying it in the way that you're doing it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, some people do placenta smoothies and things like that. And that's a lot, right? That's a lot to kind of process in your mind. But absolutely. So TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, also backs up this theory around placenta encapsulation and consuming a placenta. And certainly the mums who I have spoken to who have done placenta encapsulation have certainly found that their energy levels are increased, postpartum bleeding, hormone recovery, breast milk supply, everything that you've said, absolutely. So I think that's such a good option for mums, absolutely. I know for after my third child, he's now 3.5, I suffered with pretty severe postpartum depletion. When we are pregnant, our bodies prioritize the nutritional health of our babies first and foremost, and we come second. So if you are not eating the right foods, if you're not resting enough, then yes, it's going to have a massive implication to you postpartum. And I certainly found that the third time around. And it took me, I read that fantastic book, which I feel like I've heard you speak about in one of your podcasts before, the postpartum, natal depletion cure. And it's a really great book. It's written by a doctor who's based up in Byron. And I have an incredible GP who actually read the book and did the testing for me and sent me off for good supplementation. And so I have now gotten through that, but it took a good 6 months. So yeah, definitely ensuring that you're eating well throughout pregnancy.
Yeah. And definitely that postpartum period, which we were just talking before we started recording about the book, The First 40 Days, and how that also is based on Chinese herbal medicine and really looking after your body in that first 6 weeks, the first 40 days, and asking for help, accepting help, organizing help, and focusing on your own nourishment. Because at the end of the day, society seems to get very excited about a new baby, and it's very, it's the cuddly new thing. But actually, if a mummy's not okay, the baby's not okay. And it takes a lot more for a mum to survive the first 6 to 12 weeks than it does the baby. The baby's fine. Like, it's got the mum, it's got breast milk, it's got cuddles, it's, as long as it's sleeping and eating and pooing and, like having wet nappies, it's fine. But there's so much more for the mum to survive that. So yeah, there's so much to be said about the nourishment side of things for a beautiful postpartum. The other thing that I'm doing differently, it's interesting because so much of what we spoke about, Kate, like in the class, like with the placenta and the no syntocin, because, and this is, talk to your health practitioner, this is not medical advice, but I did find out that when you have syntocin, there is a larger, I guess there's a bigger option that you might have retained placenta. What's the word? Not bigger option, bigger.
More risk?
More likelihood. Yeah, more risk of retained placenta. And what happened with Tio is I had retained placenta and I lost about 70% of my blood. And I had to be, rushed off to get a D&C. It actually wasn't a big deal. Like, they can get it out and they fix you up very quickly. But my husband didn't know that. He just saw me get rushed out. And in hindsight, and now knowing that I don't have to accept the syntocin, that's really empowering to me because I had that experience without the risks being explained to me. So that that's why I'm a little bit obsessed with the placenta as well, because it's been a really big part of our journey, bringing our kids into the world. And another one was actually something that you mentioned in the class around external monitoring of the baby's heartbeat. And that was something that both times, the midwives or doctors saw that the heart rate was lowering and kind of freaked out a little bit. And the first time went straight for intervention, and it would have been an emergency C-section, only that I had already pushed him down a little bit. So it ended up being forceps. But it was interesting to also learn that the heartbeat can drop when they're coming out or for various different reasons, right? So the external monitoring was a really interesting one for me to know that I had a choice to be like, hey, I don't want the band on the whole time. Like, feel free to monitor it by, is it called a Doppler? The one that they sort of, like with a Doppler, but I don't want the like constant monitoring, because it could just be a fluctuation because the baby's coming down or the baby's, like getting ready for birth as well. So let's talk a bit about the options with heart rate and also with vaginal examinations as well.
Yeah. So what it's called is what is referred to as continual fetal monitoring. And so if you've gone into labor spontaneously, naturally, with no need for induction, then you've had your assessment when you first come into the hospital and baby's happy and you're happy, then, generally speaking, there's probably no reason to need or warrant that continual fetal monitoring. And so, having intermittent Doppler monitoring with that little handheld thing that you mentioned before, that is fine. If you have had an induction where you've had induction drugs or your waters have been ruptured manually, then perhaps there is need for continual monitoring, because we know that induction can have implications for baby. But if everything has unfolded really normally and naturally, then doing continual monitoring can set off alarms, if you like, unnecessarily. We need to expect that the deeper baby comes down into the pelvis, there are going to be fluctuations with heart rate. And when they're doing the Doppler monitoring, they are monitoring the baby's heart rate between surges, but also during surges, to make sure that baby is handling the surges okay and also recovering after a surge. And so, there was a research piece done recently, and I don't have it in front of me, but what they basically found was continual monitoring can end up, it increases the risk of emergency cesareans unnecessarily by quite a high number. I'm not going to quote what the number is because I can't remember for the life of me what it is. But so it can definitely result in unnecessary intervention. Yeah. Now also, on that monitoring piece, having free movement is really important if you want to be an active member in birthing your baby, right? If you are going for a drug-free natural birth, then being able to move around is really important. If you're doing continual monitoring and you've got cords hanging off you, obviously that movement is going to be impaired. We do nowadays, most hospitals do have cordless monitors. If you do have to have continual monitoring, you can request for cordless monitoring that's also waterproof so that you can have it in the bath or the shower. But does that answer that question?
Definitely. And another thing was, I think we spoke about the fact, like with vaginal examinations, and like you said, absolutely, like having to change positions, like with Freddie, because it was only a 3-hour birth and 3-hour labor, sorry. I remember they wanted to examine me at one point and I was like, I can't move. I'm in this mindset. I'm doing everything I can to stay in this mindset to just get through this without, pharmaceutical pain relief, I can't be moving. Like it completely would have stuffed with my mindset. So I remember just like kind of not even being able to speak, just kind of shaking my head. And my husband, who is, as I said, awesome during birth, he was just like, I don't think she can move. But that is the other thing, is like, if you do choose, or if you're, thrown into the path of not being able to really take anything for pain relief, all you've got is your mindset. Like, if someone kind of is constantly talking to you or asking you to do things, like, it really does kind of fuck with your, like, your whole mindset around when you're trying to, like you said, do the visualizations and just like tell yourself that you can get through it and be mentally strong enough to like get through. You can't just be, being asked to move and asked all these questions all the time, because it actually really impacts you.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as soon as we go into hospital, there's, again, it's part of the checklist. It's a part of, we got to remember that a hospital is an institution which has to manage budgets and staffing and beds and all of those things. And so it would be, and generally speaking, when you go into a hospital, it's because you're sick or unwell. And they've probably got a better understanding around most other illnesses, if you like, on how long someone's going to be there, or the process in which they have to go through. Birth is completely different because it unfolds differently every single time. And so when they want to have a way of kind of measuring or monitoring when this baby's going to be born and how long this room's going to be in use for. And if you're outside of those measures, then we need to speed things up. And, so when it comes to dilation and the cervical checks, there is this rule when it comes to hospital, and it's what midwives learn as well when they're doing their midwifery training, is that on average a woman dilates 1 centimeter every hour. That's great in theory, but it's not how it works in reality. And so a woman can dilate really quickly, like in your case, and other women can dilate really slowly. And sometimes you could go from 3 centimeters to 10 centimeters in the space of 15 minutes. So the 1 centimeter an hour rule is kind of throw that one out the window, if you like. It can be really tough as a mum if you've been labouring at home and you've been labouring like a champion. You get to a point where you're like, okay, I don't feel safe here anymore. We've got to get into hospital. And you might have been, 7 centimeters when you left home in the comfort of your own home. And whilst you've transitioned from home to hospital, it is likely that you've probably stalled in your labour, if not gone backwards, right? Because what you're telling your nervous system is, if you jump in the car and travel somewhere else, you're telling your nervous system, your ancient nervous system, that I wasn't safe where I was and I need to move to safer ground, right? So the protective mechanism within our birthing woman, within our birthing body is we need to put this on pause. We need to stall because we need to get to safer ground. And so when you get to hospital, then you have another assessment and they'll have a look at your dilation. And so do you want to know that number? Look, in my opinion, it's probably not a relevant number, and it can really throw you off, because then you might get there and they might say, oh, you're 4 centimeters. And you're like, God damn, like I've been laboring. I was like thinking I'm going to give birth at home. And now you tell me I'm 4 centimeters, or, heaven forbid, you're 2 centimeters or something, and you're thinking that you've got another 10 hours to go. It can really mess with your mind. First and foremost, those numbers are not necessarily relevant. So if you're someone who likes control, if you like to, your core need is certainty and safety and control, I understand that wanting that number could be really important, but know what it might do to you if you get a number that isn't what you want. And is it relevant? Probably not. What's more important is that you keep your mindset and keep that focus and trust in your body, trust in your baby to open and birth at the right time. So, and what you were saying was, you know, if you are laboring at the hospital and you're down on all fours and you're swaying your hips, you're over a ball or something, and, you know, 2 or 3 hours hits and a midwife comes in and says, excuse me, I need to, do you mind getting up on the bed now because we need to do a cervical examination to check your dilation. Now, first of all, you've got a mum who's in the process of birth, who's doing everything that she can to stay in her zone. And so why do we want to be accommodating the midwife or the obstetrician and have this poor birthing mum get up on a bed like that? That travel from the floor up to the bed is like, that's a marathon in itself.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's pretty cruel. On the flip side, I also do appreciate and understand that the bed, if you like, is kind of like the workbench for the midwife or the doctor. It's more sterile. There's, you know, so I get that too. But if there is no, if there's no complications, if birth is unfolding naturally, you are well within your rights to say, hey, I don't really want a cervical examination right now. Okay. So you can be empowered in that decision on how you want birth to unfold. And if that means minimal vaginal examination, then that's great, because, you know, cervical examination, they're from one midwife to another. What's the word? It's, you know, you can get a different number depending on who. It's subjective. That's the word.
Yeah.
It's subjective, right? And there's actually also a lot of other ways that we can see how birth is unfolding and see how it's progressing. And most of those are hands-free, not even touching the woman. You know, it's just watching and observing, noticing her language, noticing, is she shivering? Is she, you know, speaking differently? What movements is she making? So, you know, if we were to look at the pelvis and the spine, the base of the spine, what are we seeing? Are we seeing movement there? You know, so there's a lot of other ways that we can assess progression without asking a woman to get up on the bed and spread her legs. You know, like that is, if anything, that's going to put you back in dilation, because birthing is so much to do with the nervous system. And if you're making a woman feel uncomfortable by making movements, by asking her to get in an uncomfortable position, that's only going to put her back. I've certainly seen that. I was witness to, I was asked to be a birth partner for my sister-in-law's birth, and every single time she had a dilation check, she stalled. You know?
Yeah. I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not only is it the moving and the getting you out of the zone, one really beautiful thing that I learned from doing your classes as well was the language that we used. So the language around, and the listeners probably have picked up on this, that you're describing contractions as surges. And, you know, there's some subtle language differences between like the hypnobirthing way of describing something and like the medical way, and how our minds kind of react to those words. And surges and contractions are a really beautiful one. And then the pushing or the bearing down as well, which is often another thing, you know, that we experience when we're giving birth to our children is, you know, you get to that third stage of labor where you're pushing, and there's a bit of pressure to like push them out in a certain time frame, or intervention has to happen, which is exactly what I experienced both times, versus just knowing and trusting that it's coming. And I think like a really good example that you gave in the class was like, if someone just said to you, go and push out a poo, like how would that feel? Versus if you were doing it naturally when it felt like it needed to come. So can we talk a bit about that, about the subtle language differences, which actually make such a big empowering difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always get a laugh when I say that in classes. Like if we sat here right now and I told you to push out a poo, what would happen? And if you didn't feel like you needed to do a poo, what would happen? Like you'd probably do some damage, right?
Yeah.
You probably do some damage and feel like you're under a lot of pressure, exactly what you said. So if we don't have the urge to push or bear down and birth our babies, then, there's a protective mechanism going on. And so what can also happen is our bodies are so incredible, right? So for some women, they can get to the point of being fully dilated and then surges kind of pause. They just stop. And what we call this in physiological birth is it's the rest and be thankful phase. So if you think about it, it's like the calm before the storm. Your body is giving you a well-earned break and rest before surges start again and before you get the urge to push, breathe down or bear down to birth your baby. And so if you certainly shouldn't be pushing or bearing down without a surge and without an urge. There is a protective mechanism going on. So if you are pushing for hours on end to get your baby out, then you're probably going to do some damage. You're more likely to do some damage to the perineum and potentially even your pelvic floor. So trusting in your body, listening to what your body's telling you, and only bearing down when you have the urge and a surge. And so from the language point of view, wow. Okay, so I kind of like, if we go back to that story and the history of birth and early obstetrics being born and, doctors kind of selling, if you like, the expertise of male obstetrics versus midwife-led care, I kind of feel like there was some good marketing that took place back then. And they were like, how can we sell ourselves? And they were like, right, let's, if a woman's having issues with her cervix and it's opening too early, what we'll do is we'll call it an incompetent cervix. That'll make them feel, and then they need us, right? Now, that's pretty rough, perhaps. But yeah, so there's some terrible language that we use around women. Incompetent cervix is definitely one. I had an incompetent cervix with my last pregnancy. I was also a geriatric mother because I was over 35.
Hates that term so much. Sorry, I just have to interject there. Whenever I hear the term geriatric mother, I want to punch the medical system that is even a thing. That is so incredibly disrespectful for a mother that has gone to most of the time either fallen pregnant, or some of my friends have actually gone through IVF to fall pregnant, and then they're called a geriatric mother. There could not be a more disrespectful term to give to a mother that just happens to be over 35, which is not even old. It's still childbearing age. Where did that come from?
Yeah, it's so bad. So bad. I was also told I had an in hostile uterus at one point when I was having all these, when I was having my miscarriages as well. Failure to progress, all of those kinds of terms can be, words are like spells. They can make us feel certain ways about ourselves, our body, the process of birth, and how other people view us as well.
So what are some suggestions with language changes? Obviously, we've spoken about surges and bearing down. What else would you suggest in terms of how a pregnant woman would talk about her experience, and also perhaps suggest from the medical practitioner?
Yeah, so I think the word pain is a massive one, okay? And so when we, if you've ever been into hospital for any reason, I'm sure you would have had a nurse ask you, what are your pain levels out of 10, right? And so if we have someone asking us in labour, how much pain are we in? What we have to do to give that person an answer is to actually go within and find pain to then provide that answer. So that is certainly not something that we want to be doing in labour. Labour isn't always, how shall I say, it's not always comfortable, but let's reframe that. And rather than pain, let's talk about powerful, intense, or let's just refer to it as the sensations. And so really the aim of labour and birth is to let go of tension and surrender, kind of get out of your body's way and allow it to do its thing. And so if we instead talk about our comfort levels, how we can be more comfortable, or we talk about the sensations and the intensity and the wildness, then I don't know, it just kind of feels more empowering. Yeah. And I guess some other words, like the bloody show. Let's instead just call it the mucus plug or a show, right? There's some other really interesting terms that we use in labour and birth that could probably be better changed.
Definitely. And so the other thing that I am changing, or, am choosing to do slightly differently this time with this birth, is the pain relief that I will use. And interestingly, I learnt that pain relief does not just apply to the pharmaceutical drugs that you can take during labour, which are amazing. And we're living in an amazing time that there's all sorts of different options available to you, which is amazing. And also, I hadn't realised that there was a lot of different pain relief options or solutions, such as water birth and the low lighting and music and affirmations and all these things are also considered to be pain relief. So I've not had the opportunity to have a water birth because of just my history and blood loss various times, but they're giving me that opportunity this time, which I'm really grateful for and I'm very, very excited for. And I wanted to talk a little bit on that topic of pain relief because it is something that I'm doing differently this time. And I'm also completely open to, if I decide in the moment to have an epidural, I will have an epidural, because I think, there's no trophies or badges or awards handed out at the end of childbirth to say like, well done, like you did go or didn't go or whatever without pain relief. I think you just got to do with what's right for you. And also I think it's really empowering to know the different options available to you. So in terms of the non-pharmaceutical things, what can you share on pain relief and how that actually works?
Yeah. So I think what you mentioned before, definitely we have access to great pharmaceutical pain relief if and when we need it. So I'm definitely not poo-pooing any of those options. Yes, you do need to do what is right for you. But yeah, there are a lot of things that we can use before we get to that point. And so one of the things which I find is probably most beneficial for most of the couples who I teach is a TENS machine. And so this is non-pharmaceutical. And if you've been to a physio for anything before and had those kind of sticky electromagnetic pads put on a muscle, that's what a TENS machine is. You put 4 pads on your back, and the TENS machine that I hire out to my clients is one specifically designed for birth. And so you've got a button. It provides, if you like, a buzzing stimulation through your back. And then you've got a button which you press for when you're having a surge, and then that intensifies the buzzing sensation. And what that's actually doing is blocking the pain receptors and instead helping the body to release pain-relieving endorphins. Endorphins are our natural pain reliever. It's the hormone of pleasure. And so, TENS machines are great. So if we use them, I find that earlier on you use them in labour, the better they work. Although I kind of feel like you were telling me that you tried a TENS machine in one of your births, but you put it on too late and it felt like it just didn't work for you?
Yeah, I used it with my first. I hired it and I can't really remember, to be honest, what stage of labor I was in. I was definitely like at some point in the first, it was an 8-hour labor. It wasn't like, it wasn't when I was pushing. But the way that I described it was like if you stubbed your toe and you cut your arm off to take your mind off the fact that you stubbed your toe. Like I found it really painful and I was like, this is way more painful than my contraction. So I don't think I was using it properly because it definitely wasn't what you've just described.
Yeah. So I do remember you telling that story and having a laugh in the class. So yeah, for the most part, the earlier on you use it and, you start the TENS machine at a lower level and then you build up as the labor intensifies. Yeah. That tends to work really well. Other options for pain relief is water. So water is a wonderful pain relieving option, whether that be in the shower, in bath, even just a warm washer, warm compress on your back or, around your neck or what have you. That can be really good. Acupressure. So doing hip squeezes, and there's lots of different acupressure points, which we actually learn in the course as well. And different massage techniques like light touch massage. Again, that's helping you to release pain relieving endorphins through your body. Another one I mentioned before was visualization, using breath work. And another one, I'm not I'm still kind of in, but if one is experiencing in labor, and there is also an option sterile water injections. And so sterile water injections are just as they sound. It's sterile water, so it's not pharmaceutical, and they are injected into the back. And so you'll typically do 2 to 4 points. And I'm not going to lie, it's not comfortable when you're getting the injection. Kind of feels like a bit of a wasp bite. But as far as pain relief goes, once those injections have been done, it can be chalk and cheese, the experience. It can be so effective. And you can do that, every couple of hours if you wanted to. So there's a few of the different pain relieving options that are available to you. In the course, I teach a lot of instant relaxation techniques that can help you get back into the zone if you kind of feel like you're losing it a little bit and coming out of that labor land. But also just empowering yourself with the knowledge and understanding of the processes and what to expect and the feelings that you might be having, for example, through transition. Just knowing and understanding that kind of helps you in your pain relief as well, because if you recognize it or your partner says to you, hey, you're going through transition, babe, like listen to what you're saying, listen to what you're doing, you're going through transition. Like to be told that when you're at a point which is the most challenging part of your labor can be like, oh, it can snap you out of it, right? It can be like, oh my gosh, yes, I'm here. I'm like, I've done the worst of it. I'm around the corner. It can be really amazing.
Both labors, when I was transitioning, both times I said, I can't do this. Like, I just can't do this. And that's when I knew that I was transitioning. Yeah. So in terms of your amazing course that we've spoken about a few times, if anyone would like to check out your offers, when your next courses are running, how to work with you, what's the best way for them to check you out and connect with you?
So you can either find me on Instagram or on my website. So my website is www.mindbodyfertilityandbirth.com.au, or you can find me on Instagram or Facebook at mind.body.fertility.birth.
Awesome. And I will pop them in the show notes as well. So what an empowering conversation. I'm so grateful for you, Kate. I loved everything that we spoke about, and I hope that anyone listening that is either pregnant or knows someone that's pregnant or is planning on being pregnant in the future really got some value from how many options and the choices and the incredible, empowering, beautiful experience you actually can have with your birth. So is there anything that I haven't asked you or mentioned that you'd like to add before we wrap up, Kate?
Look, I could talk for a million days about this, but probably one thing that we didn't talk about is other things in the course. Like, we also do cover cesarean birth as well. It doesn't matter, at the end of the day, if someone comes to me for childbirth education, what is paramount to me is that at the end of their birth, they're not traumatized. So if I can support someone and educate someone to have a positive birth experience, that's what's most important. The details, as in, did you have pain relief? Was it emergency cesarean? They're just details. They're just details, because sometimes we're going to have, challenges and special circumstances that come up. So what's most important to me is having a positive birth experience despite the twists and turns that you might face. Yeah.
I love that. Someone asked me the other day, because I said I'd been doing a lot of pregnancy meditations, and they're like, oh, well, like, what are you visualizing? And I was like, it's actually not about the details for me. It's about how I feel. Like, I just want to feel really empowered and calm. Like, I just want that calm environment for the birth. I'm so unattached to how it happens. Like, if I have a water birth, if I don't have a water birth, if I have drugs, no drugs, whatever, like, happen to have it at home because we don't get to the hospital in time, or have it at the hospital, whatever. Like, I just am visualizing how I want to feel. And I think that is a beautiful point you've made. Like, it's about having an empowering experience, and just also appreciating what your body has actually achieved. No matter how that happens, what it's achieved to bring a baby earthside is pretty goddamn incredible.
Absolutely.
So, final question. If you could go back and tell your 21-year-old self one thing that she needed to hear, what would that be?
Before we wrap up this episode, I want to ask you a question. Do you remember how you discovered this podcast? Was it a friend's suggestion or an Instagram story, maybe a post? Somehow you found it, and I'm hoping you're getting a lot of value from it. I need your help now to pay it forward so that other women can feel seen, heard, nourished, and more than anything, empowered from these conversations too. Big love, back to the episode.
Oh, I love that question so much. If I was to be completely honest, I thought about, because I knew you were going to ask that. When I was 21, I'm going to say, like, I was a freaking rock star. Like, I loved it. I had, like, I was working full time, but I also had my side hustle, and I was doing event management, and I was just putting on these awesome music events down in Manly, and I was living my best life. So if I was to tell my 21-year-old self anything, I would want her to know that she is freaking amazing, and to keep on hustling, and to just keep being you, keep doing you, and just don't stop until you're proud.
Beautiful. That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, Kate, and for joining and for that whole discussion. I'm so grateful for you and proud that we got to bring this to life. And as I mentioned, Kate's contact details and website will be in the show notes. If you got any value from this, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to screenshot this episode, share it to your stories, tag us both on Instagram, or reach out. And yeah, if you do know someone that would benefit from it, from this discussion, pass this episode on to them, because we're all about paying it forward and empowering as many women as we possibly can. So thank you so much for joining. And until next time, take care, and we will see you in the next episode.